When you are thinking about your inclusion mainstream fund and your inclusion strategy, you need to make sure that you're thinking about the social and emotional difficulties of the young people that you work with. And that's where social and emotional mentoring absolutely comes into play, because we are talking about evidence-based interventions to address social and emotional difficulties early on, identify the skills gaps that are missing in order to avoid later mental health difficulties and the onset of more complex mental health difficulties. So this is really fundamental to effective mentoring in within education. And so when you're thinking about your early interventions, you're thinking about your evidence-based early interventions, then something you should definitely make sure that you included is social and emotional mentoring. Now, there are different types of social and emotional mentoring. You know, we could be talking about children's mentors who work within primary schools, and they are trained to assess and deliver interventions for groups or individual children with social and emotional difficulties. And then we've also got then young people's mentors who are trained to work in secondary or further education or alternative provision. And so these often work with a wider range of pupils or a larger range of students who, and it may be on a more ad hoc basis, it may be on a less frequent basis, it may be less intense than maybe social and emotional mentoring looks like in primary school, but it's still a really important early intervention when we're thinking about things that will avoid social and emotional difficulties, things that will avoid attendance issues, that could avoid behavioural issues, could avoid later mental health difficulties, could avoid friendship and social difficulties, even getting through to thinking about employment and employability skills and work readiness for some of our young people in secondary and further education. Actually, if their social and emotional skills are holding them back, then they might experience more difficulties and more barriers, getting into work or maintaining work or even just being work ready. And so when we are thinking about your strategy, when we're thinking about your long-term plan for supporting your students, we need to make sure that we've embedded a really good, effective early intervention approach that will identify those pupils, identify the young people who are at risk, identify those young people who maybe are hiding it, are acting inwards, are withdrawn, that don't necessarily, crop up on radars because of their attendance, because of their behavioural incidents or something like that. Actually, they are just as vulnerable, or some would say even more vulnerable than the young people who are acting outwards. And so when we are thinking about your strategy and thinking about what you're putting in your strategy, make sure that you have got a very robust line related to the role of social and emotional mentoring and its use as an early intervention to identify those pupils who are at risk, to identify strategies that can be put in place to support them, to identify those who are the most vulnerable, that may be overlooked, that may be falling into cracks, because actually that's the purpose of the Inclusion Mainstream Fund. It's all about actually making sure that you've got a really robust strategy for making sure that your pupils are going to thrive and achieve in the future. So when you're doing your Inclusion Mainstream Fund strategy, please make sure that you've included social and emotional mentoring as an evidence-based early intervention for addressing social and emotional skills gaps, early mental health difficulties that can then or could be linked to later vulnerabilities.